Sometimes it felt like life passed her by the same way a dining room passed the kitchen, just out of reach. People laughed, raised their glasses, closed deals, and debated between foie gras and oysters, while she stood in the shadows in a white apron, chopping arugula in silence. Samantha Porter knew that feeling down to her bones. At 26, Samantha worked in the kitchen of one of Portland's most upscale restaurants, Elowen, the kind of place people booked for anniversaries, proposals, or just to feel important. It wasn't just about cooking there. Every dish was assembled like a mosaic, like a piece of art. And Samantha? She dreamed of being that kind of artist, a chef, a creator, the mind behind the plate. But for now, her station was the cold line, the salad section. The place where things were simple and repetitive. Chop, portion, arrange, garnish. Her hands made the food look beautiful, but the ideas weren't hers. She got up every morning at 5:30, made herself breakfast on a toaster that sparked occasionally, then drove her beat-up 2004 Toyota Corolla across town to the restaurant. She rarely made it home before 1 a.m. Her shift technically ended at midnight, but she'd stay after to clean. Extra hours meant extra cash. And she needed every bit she could get. For student loans, for rent in her drafty room in an old Victorian house that came with free chills and creaky pipes, for gas, groceries, and sometimes just to make it to Friday. Samantha had learned long ago that in this city, it was easier to walk past someone than to notice they were drowning. That's why she had a secret mission. Nobody knew. Not sous chef Jason, not Carla the maitre d', not even Michelle from the bakery section, who sometimes slipped her a donut. Every night, when the restaurant wound down, tables cleared, glasses washed, last guests calling their Ubers, Samantha opened up the storage containers and began her quiet ritual. Unused veggies, a chicken breast that never made it to the table, trimmings of salmon, half a baguette, a dollop of butter, a couple of roasted potatoes, maybe a scoop of pasta. Anything that hadn't touched a guest's plate but couldn't be kept, the stuff headed for the trash, she salvaged. She sorted it, packed it carefully in plastic containers, and tucked it into her old gym bag, making it look like trash. Then she slipped out the back door, past the recycling bin, and walked toward a little park just around the corner. A place the city seemed to have forgotten. In the shadows, under benches, behind lilac bushes, lived others who were forgotten too. Stray cats, a few dogs, even a raccoon or two. Samantha laid the food out in small piles, spaced far enough apart to prevent fights. She knew them all by face. The gray cat missing an ear, the limping mutt with a permanent lean. And then there was a new one. The dog had shown up about 2 weeks ago, an old German shepherd, all matted fur and wary eyes, but with a proud stance. She didn't eat with the others. She'd approach silently, grab a meal, always the biggest one, and vanish into the night. Something about her was different, serious, focused, with a purpose. One night, around 2 a.m., Samantha stayed later than usual, scrubbing the oven, wiping down counters. The streets were nearly empty by the time she stepped out. The shepherd showed up again, took the food, disappeared down the same dark alley. But this time, Samantha followed. She moved quietly, sticking to the shadows. The wind chased stray wrappers across the pavement, and the whole city felt dreamlike, like it was breathing in its sleep. The dog padded across 2 blocks, past a shuttered car wash, and turned behind an old, abandoned strip mall. There, between the building's wall and a rusted dumpster, tucked into a makeshift shelter of cardboard and blankets, she stopped. A man sat there, thin, gray-haired. His hands were cracked and red from the cold. He wore a jacket so worn it looked like it had been rejected even by a Salvation Army bin. He was holding a piece of salmon in his lap, sharing it with the dog like it was a family dinner. They ate in silence, calm, like 2 people who had lost everything, except each other. "Hi," Samantha said softly. The man jerked. The dog growled low. "It's okay," she said, holding her hands up. I just saw her take the food. I wanted to know who it was for. Now I do." A pause. "Would you like me to start bringing an extra bag? So there's enough for both of you?" The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slowly, like he didn't quite believe this was real. His eyes were tired, but there was warmth in them. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he quickly wiped it away with his sleeve. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you, ma'am." That's how it started, their quiet, strange friendship. No handshakes, no promises, no conditions, just food, just kindness, just a good heart reaching out in the quiet shadows of a big, busy city. She called her lucky, not because she looked particularly fortunate, but because somehow, against all odds, she'd found someone who loved her when the world had turned its back. Samantha was starting to understand what existed between that old man and his dog was more than survival. It was trust. Quiet, clinging, like the cold and late fall. Now her nightly routine wasn't just about feeding strays. She brought 2 bags, one with dog food, the other with something a person could eat. She never asked who the man had once been. The first time he said, "Name's Walter Jennings," he said it like he was dusting off a name from a book that hadn't been opened in years. Walt, that's what she called him in her mind, always greeted her with a kind of wary gratitude. He ate in silence. Sometimes he thanked her, sometimes he just stroked Lucky's fur, and that said more than any words could. Occasionally he told stories. Short ones. Like he was afraid of becoming boring. He said he'd worked as an electrician. "I used to run light, so people wouldn't sit in the dark." Samantha had thought that was ironic, because now he lived surrounded by shadows. He told her about his wife, May, who had a warm smile and a habit of baking cookies every Friday, because life should at least smell like vanilla sometimes. She'd died of liver cancer. Too fast. Medical bills had eaten their savings, and then the bank came like a shark and took what was left. Their house, their car, their furniture. Even the photos had to be left behind because there was nowhere to put them. He ended up on the street. Lucky showed up a couple of months later. Like she knew he wouldn't make it on his own. "I didn't save her," he said once. "She saved me." And Samantha believed him. Because there was no drama in his voice, just truth. Sometimes she stayed longer, sat next to him on the cold curb eating her sandwich, sharing a paper cup of cheap coffee with him. They didn't talk about life, didn't complain. They just sat together. And that was enough. But one night, something changed. It was raining. That clingy, miserable Pacific Northwest kind of rain that sneaks under your collar, into your soul, into your mood. Samantha showed up like always, 2 containers in her bag. She wore a raincoat and her boots slipped on the wet asphalt. She turned the corner, past the dumpsters, and stopped in front of the little alcove. Empty. No Walt. No Lucky. Maybe they moved on, she thought. It wasn't the first time someone living on the street had to relocate. When things got rough or the city started clearing people out. But he wasn't there the next night either. Or the one after that. Lucky was gone too. Something in Samantha twisted tight. By the 4th night, she couldn't sit still. That creeping anxiety felt like she'd lost something that had become a part of her. That evening, she pulled on a hoodie and a pair of old jeans, grabbed a container and a flashlight and went looking. She ended up in the park. Empty, benches slick with rain, streetlights flickering, a faint glow from nearby apartment windows. The same park where she'd first started feeding animals. And there, near the old fountain, she saw her. Lucky. The dog was pacing, tail twitching, ears flat, eyes darting. When she spotted Samantha, she rushed over, not like usual. Not with pride or caution. Her eyes said, "Come with me, now." And Samantha followed. No questions. They crossed a block, then another. Turned around an old brick building, climbed down a slippery slope to an abandoned, underground parking lot, where the wind from the river cut through everything. In a corner, between 2 cardboard boxes, lay Walt. He was pale, porcelain pale. His breathing was shallow. His cough rattled from his throat like rusty nails. His forehead was slick with sweat, his eyes barely open. "Walt." Samantha dropped to her knees, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911 without hesitation. The dispatcher picked up quickly. She explained the situation, the location, the symptoms. The voice on the line was calm, firm. "Help is on the way, ma'am. You're doing the right thing. Stay with him." Until the sirens appeared around the corner, Samantha sat beside him, holding Walt's hand and stroking Lucky's head. The dog trembled, like she knew something might break forever. When the EMTs arrived, they first assumed Samantha was his daughter. She shook her head. "No, just someone who cared." "Is he dying?" she asked one of them. "If you hadn't called, most likely, yeah," the man said. "But now he's got a shot." They lifted Walt onto the stretcher. Samantha took Lucky by her makeshift leash, just a piece of rope, really. The dog didn't resist. She just panted fast like she'd run a marathon. As the ambulance turned the corner and disappeared, Samantha stayed there. Alone, in the rain, with one thought echoing loud in her mind. Even if he survives, he still won't have a home. And that's when it hit her. This story couldn't end with just a rescue. This wasn't some feel-good tale about heroism. This was a story about what comes next, about what you do when someone who's been saved still has nowhere to go. The night the ambulance took Walt away, Samantha couldn't sleep. She sat in her tiny rented room, its peeling ceiling, the smell of old wood, and the fridge that hummed like an old air conditioner. Everything in this place screamed, "You're here temporarily." But what do you do when temporarily lasts for 2 years? Lucky was curled up at her feet on an old blanket. She was softly snoring like for the first time in a long while. She felt safe. Samantha looked at her and thought she had no idea that by saving him, she was saving me too. It was around 2 in the morning. Her thoughts buzzed like a swarm of bees, about injustice, about the people who walk by, about those who live between the lines, not in houses, but in niches, in basements, in the shadows. And suddenly she wanted someone to see, to hear, to feel what she was feeling. Not out of pity, but out of humanity. She grabbed her phone, sat on the bed, and turned on the front camera. No filters, no preparation. Tired, disheveled, in her worn-out hoodie, her voice raw from emotion. She started speaking. "Hey, I'm not a blogger, not a celebrity, just a girl who works in a restaurant kitchen. Every night I bring food to those no one sees, the homeless animals. And a couple of weeks ago, I noticed this one dog. She was taking food, and I followed her." Then she told the story of Walt, his life, about Lucky, how they lived together like 2 lost lighthouses in the middle of a stranger's city, about how he disappeared, and how she found him. Now he's in the hospital. I don't know if he'll make it, but I do know that when he gets out, he'll have nowhere to go again. And I'm scared, not just for him, but for the fact that there are thousands of people like him. Maybe tens of thousands, maybe more. The video was just over 3 minutes long. She ended simply, "If you see this, please share, or tell someone, or just don't walk by. Sometimes even a cup of soup can feel like a hug. Thank you." She posted the video to TikTok first, then to Instagram Reels. After that, she closed the phone, turned off the light, and lay down next to Lucky. She wasn't expecting anything. She just needed to get it out. It felt like releasing a weight. The alarm rang at 6:30 a.m., like it always did. She quickly got dressed, checked Lucky's bowl, left her some water, kissed her on the forehead, and went to work. The workday started as usual. Peeling carrots, checking the fridges, slicing avocados. Round and round, mechanically. Just like always. Around 9 in the evening, when the evening rush started to die down, the maître Carla walked into the kitchen. Usually strict, dry, with perfect posture and a voice that made the plates vibrate. But now, she had a strange look on her face. Surprised and confused. "Samantha, you've got visitors. They say it's urgent." "Who?" she asked, wiping her hands. "Just go, you'll see." She walked down the hallway toward the dining area, and froze. There were people standing there. Not 1 or 2, a dozen. Maybe more. Some were holding phones, some had flowers. One guy had a check in his hand. On his phone screen was her face. The video. Millions of views. "Is this you?" asked a woman in glasses. "Samantha?" "Yeah," she whispered. The crowd clapped, not over the top but with warmth. One man stepped forward and said, "I saw your video. I was homeless 3 years ago. Now I have a business, and I want to help. For Walt and Lucky. Here." He handed her a check. $5,000. In another envelope, contacts, donations, shelter addresses. People came up, hugged her, thanked her. Even the guests already sitting at their tables started to stand up, applauding. One man said, "You're the true face of Portland. You reminded us who we are." Samantha stood there stunned, like she had landed on another planet. She, the one no one noticed for years, the one who polished dishes and mopped floors, had suddenly been seen. It was like something bigger than kindness had come alive right before her eyes. It was a wave. A virus. But not a sickness, a healing. Later, in the locker room, Samantha sat on the bench, holding the envelope to her chest. Her hands were shaking, and there were tears, not from happiness, but from overload, from the fact that for so long she had believed her voice meant nothing. Now she knew. It did. And somewhere deep inside, a thought began to form. If everyone could see just one invisible person, this world could turn in a different direction. The morning was gray. A damp fog rolled over the streets of Portland, as if the city couldn't decide whether it was still night or already day. Samantha walked along the sidewalk, wedged between a cup of cheap latte and a box of homemade chicken soup. Inside, a nervous energy churned, the kind that scratches at you from the inside, like claws, uncertainty, anxiety, excitement. Yesterday's emotional whirlwind had been too much, too loud, too sudden, and still unsettled in her mind. But one thing was clear. Today, she would see Walt. And she would tell him they weren't alone. The drive to the hospital took 40 minutes. She stood at the registration desk when she heard, "Excuse me, are you Samantha?" Turning around, she saw a young woman with a camera. She was wearing a hoodie with the Portland Local Buzz logo and a badge that read, Jesse Alvarez. Samantha recognized her immediately. The local blogger activist, always smiling, known for tackling real social issues, not just filming how a street artist played on a trash can. "I saw your video," Jesse began. "It went viral. My team and I would love to do an interview, nothing formal. Just to show how human kindness can change lives. Is it okay if I'm with you?" "I don't know. This is all so unexpected." "That's exactly why it's important," Jesse replied softly. "People trust you. You're not playing, you're not posing, you're real, and that's rare." Samantha nodded, then nodded again, because in truth, she didn't know how to act with all this attention. She wasn't doing this for the spotlight. But since she was the voice for Walt and Lucky, why not? Walt was lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV. He looked worn out, his skin pale and gray, but his eyes lit up as soon as he saw her. "You brought an army," he rasped with a faint smile. Samantha sat down on the plastic chair next to his bed, placed the box of soup on the nightstand, and took his hand. "You've got your own army now. People have been watching our video. They're asking how they can help. One guy sent money, another offered you a place to stay for a couple of months, and a family even found an old van. They want to give it to you if you get better." Walt froze. He didn't cry, but his eyes filled with a warm, watery look. He turned his gaze to the window, where the raindrops slid down slowly, as if time had slowed. "All this from one video?" he exhaled. "From you?" "From us," she replied. "From Lucky. And from people suddenly remembering they can be better." At that moment, the door opened. A nurse came in with a new batch of meds, and behind her was a reporter in a jacket with the Coin 6 News logo. "Mr. Jennings, we'd like to get a comment. Is that okay?" Walt looked at Samantha. She nodded. That evening, when Samantha got home, their story was already on the front page of Reddit. The topic was being discussed on Twitter, in podcasts, even on the local radio station. Comments were flooding in endlessly. Some people offered to foster Lucky if need be. Some offered Walt a job. One person wrote, "Damn, if every city had a Samantha, maybe we wouldn't lose people like this." Samantha read this while sitting in her room, holding Lucky on her lap, trying to wrap her mind around it all. Yesterday, she was the girl on the salad line, and today, she was a symbol of compassion. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Carla, the boss, the restaurant owner, college friends she hadn't heard from in years. Even her mother, with whom she hadn't spoken since graduation, sent a short but unexpected text. "Proud of you. Call me." The next morning, right before her shift began, a representative from the mayor's office walked into the restaurant. He didn't look like a typical bureaucrat, more like a former biker, wearing a denim jacket and a tattoo that read USMC on his neck. But he spoke firmly. "The city wants to honor you, not officially, just human to human. We're launching a program called Second Meal, delivering surplus food from restaurants to shelters and aid stations. The idea came from your video. We need your consent and participation." Samantha barely managed to say, "Of course." A few days later, Walt was moved to a rehab center. He was slowly recovering, and every day Samantha was there. Jesse kept filming, not intrusively, not in a sensationalist way, but with warmth. The audience was growing. People were sending not just money, but letters, drawings, postcards. Lucky sat by the bed, sometimes whining if Walt slept too long, or if she lost sight of him. Samantha and Lucky had become connected by an invisible thread. Like three people, once discarded on the side of the road, now leading a whole army of change. At some point closer to night, Walt looked at her, propped up on his pillows. Never thought I'd become the news. I'm just an old guy with a dog. And I'm just a girl with a ladle, she smirked. He reached out and squeezed her fingers. You've changed my life. Not because you saved me, but because you showed that I'm still a human. Her eyes filled with tears. You've always been human, Walt. It's just now others remembered it. The restaurant Crescendo had always been considered a symbol of sophistication in Portland. Reservations made a month in advance, 5-course meals, white tablecloths, candles, waiters in black bow ties, a place where proposals were made, multi-million-dollar contracts were signed, and selfies were taken that gained likes on Instagram just for the view of the plate. But Samantha had always seen the glossy facade from the inside. From the kitchen's steam, the heavy pots, and the rubber gloves used to wash the floors. She stood backstage with no chance of stepping onto the stage. Until today. The owner's office was on the second floor of the restaurant. For the first time, Samantha was going up there not to replace a filter in the coffee machine or move wine boxes, but on a personal invitation. Her heart was pounding, her palms were sweating. She'd put on her cleanest shirt and straightened her hair. But she still had the feeling in her head, I don't belong to this world. The door opened, and the manager, Roberto, an elderly Italian man with a face carved out of oak and an accent no American college could hide, gave her an approving nod. You're the hero today. Go in there and hear it from the boss himself. The office was spacious, smelling of wood and leather. At the desk sat Raymond Cole, the owner of Crescendo, wearing a perfectly pressed shirt and a serious expression that usually meant a firing. But not today. He stood up and shook her hand. Samantha, what you've done isn't just inspiring, it's hit us right in the heart, in a good way. I didn't, she started, but he stopped her with a gesture. You showed that a restaurant isn't just a business. It's a place where change can begin, where food isn't a symbol of luxury, but a means of salvation. I don't want our story to end with just a viral video. We're starting a movement. Together. He walked over to a glass board where the usual revenue charts and sanitation checklists were displayed. Now on the board, there was a plan titled Second Meal Initiative. We've partnered with other restaurants, grocery chains, and even the city hall. You've inspired dozens of other owners. Starting today, we'll be collecting excess food. Every day. You'll oversee logistics, packaging, and delivery. We're setting up a separate kitchen in our basement for the charity project. And this, he pulled an envelope from his drawer and handed it to her. Inside was a new contract. This is your new position. Second Meal Program Manager. Full benefits, paid vacation, increased pay, and your own key to your office. You've earned it. Samantha couldn't hold back the tears. She was used to being invisible, used to her efforts staying in the shadows. But now she was part of something truly big. Thank you, she whispered. But honestly, it's not just because of me. It's because of Walt and Lucky. I just did what you had to do, Raymond finished. And that's what leadership is. The next morning, the restaurant looked different. In the corner of the dining room stood a glass donation box. On the walls was a small photo installation. Lucky, Walt, Samantha. Under each photo were quotes from comments left by thousands of social media users. Every plate can be a chance. Not all kindness is loud, but all of it matters. Being human isn't a trend. It's a choice. A new dish appeared on the menu, the second meal dish, a dish where part of the proceeds went to help the homeless. In the first day alone, there were over 100 orders. And that evening, Samantha didn't go to the kitchen but to the dining area, in a maitre outfit. Clean shirt, a crisp vest, her hair in a low ponytail, and for the first time she didn't feel like just an employee. She felt like the owner of the space, a woman with a voice. One evening, a family sat at the table by the window, a mother, 2 kids, and an elderly father. They had the look of people who didn't often dine out. Samantha went over to them, took their order, and before leaving noticed the young boy, about 8 years old, staring at the donation box. Is this about the dog and the man? He asked. Yes, she smiled. Have you heard about them? My mom and I watched the video. I later gave my money from my piggy bank. I hope they buy a ball for the dog. Samantha couldn't hold back. She crouched down to his level, looking him in the eyes. You know what? They already bought it, but you helped make this world better. Thank you. The boy puffed out his chest proudly, and Samantha realized a revolution isn't always protests and slogans. Sometimes it starts with one container of food and ends with a child believing kindness matters. That evening, as she was closing up the restaurant, she stepped outside. Fall was already creeping through the evening air. In her hands, a box of leftovers. Not in secret, as before, but officially. In the trunk, a bag for the night delivery. She got into her car and turned on the radio. The host was announcing, Portland residents, don't miss, this Saturday, Night of Streetlights. A celebration dedicated to the Second Meal Charity Program. The headliner, the Decemberists. Guest of honor, Samantha Porter, the woman who started the revolution from a diner. She laughed, lightly, without irony, just from the feeling that life was finally falling into place. The first real morning after being discharged from the hospital, Walter Jennings woke up not to the cold or the sound of garbage bins being dragged across the street. Not because someone was trying to take his sleeping bag, and not even to Lucky's barking. He woke up to silence. A clean white room. A window letting in soft light. The sheets, not torn, not from someone else's couch, but crisp, smelling like laundry detergent. Above the headboard was a wooden plaque with his name on it, his real name. Not Guy with the Shepherd or Old Man by the Mall, but Walter Jennings. Like back in the days when he had a home, a family, and a ringing alarm clock. Lucky was curled up on her own blanket, next to her bowl and the rubber ball some kid had given her. She noticed he was awake, yawned, and as usual, nudged him in the cheek with her nose. "Good morning, baby," Walter muttered, scratching her behind the ear. He couldn't even believe this was really happening. The housing had been provided by a city program, launched with the help of volunteers, local businesses, and people inspired by the stories Samantha had shared. It was a modest apartment, a studio in the Hawthorne district, with a park across the street and a 24-hour convenience store a block away. For many, it was just cheap housing. For Walter, it was the start of a new life. On his first day, he just sat on the couch for a long time. He didn't watch TV, didn't read. He just listened to the silence. Because silence was also a luxury when you've spent so many years living on the streets. On the third day, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the threshold was Samantha, holding a bag of groceries, and that same warm smile that seemed to keep the whole city energized. "How are you?" she asked, stepping inside. "Feels like I'm 20 again." Walter grinned, pointing at the kettle. "Want some coffee? They've even got filters here." They sat and chatted for a long time. About work, about Lucky, about how his life had changed. Walter told her he'd been invited to an interview with a construction company. One of Crescendo's partners was looking for an experienced electrician for a project restoring old buildings. He was nervous, but his eyes were full of excitement. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not just existing, but living." "Thank you, Samantha. I don't even know how to repay you." "Just live," she replied. "That's enough." A week later, Walter started his new job. The first few days were tough. He'd gotten out of practice with the pace, the alarm clocks, the feeling that someone was actually counting on him. But his hands remembered. Wiring, diagrams, tape, it was like riding a bike. Once you learn, you don't forget. He also started paying it forward. Not the debts to the bank, the soul debts. He helped other homeless people, gave advice, told them where to go, who to write to, how to gather paperwork. Sometimes he just sat next to those who had lost everything and said, "You're not alone. I've been in that hole too. But I got out." As for Samantha, she was changing too. No longer that quiet girl on the salad line. Now she was managing a whole program, leading negotiations, coordinating teams. In the basement kitchen of Crescendo, full hot meals were being prepared. Soups, pasta, stews, mashed potatoes, vegetables. Every evening, they were delivered around the city, to metro stations, parks, shelters. People were waiting for her. Because food wasn't just about nourishment. It was a way to say, "I see you. You matter." One Saturday afternoon, Samantha decided to take a walk. It was early spring. The air smelled like earth and wet leaves. In the park, in the very alley where she used to leave food for the animals, she saw familiar silhouettes. Walter and Lucky. He was sitting on a bench in his work jacket, tired but content. Lucky was running through the grass, chasing pigeons, and then, spotting Samantha, happily ran up and jumped into her lap. You're right on time, Walter smiled. We're on break. You look great, she said. I was just thinking, he replied, looking up at the sky. Maybe all we're doing is just passing warmth along. Like a torch. Someone passed it to you, you passed it to me, and now I'm passing it to someone else. He turned to her and quietly added, You're my angel, Samantha. She didn't respond, she just looked into his eyes. Because at that moment she understood. The greatest miracles happen quietly, without flashes, without fanfare. They hide in a box of leftovers, in a dog's embrace, in a handshake at a job interview. And the most important thing is, they live in us. And maybe the real restaurant isn't a building with expensive dishes. It's a place where there's always room for kindness. Epilogue. Exactly 1 year had passed since that evening when Samantha first walked through the dark streets after the shepherd, not knowing where her path would lead. It was a spring evening. Portland was buzzing as usual. The streets didn't smell as sharply of homelessness anymore. Somewhere, it felt a little quieter, a little warmer. In the back parking lot of Crescendo, volunteers were gathered again. One of them, a 16-year-old boy in a hoodie, nervously twirling a list in his hands. Hey, someone said from behind. First time here? He turned around. In front of him stood a woman with kind but confident eyes. No fuss, holding a box of rations. Yeah, I saw the video. It's old, but I don't know. Something clicked. I wanted to be part of this. Well, welcome, she smiled. I'm Samantha. Come on, I'll show you where the real magic starts. Across the park, under a street lamp, an old man sat with his dog. He watched the scene, holding a thermos of coffee and smiling. The dog, already with graying spots, still watched the darkness vigilantly. Every so often, kids would run up, petting the dog, offering cookies. One boy even handed the dog a ribbon with the words, "For Lucky, the kindest dog in the city." Walter took a sip of his coffee and whispered, "See, kiddo? It's all still going, and it's all because of one plate of food." He looked at the restaurant. Through the window, he could see Samantha laughing with the team, handing out tasks, encouraging the newcomers. Some guy put his hand on her shoulder, thanked her, and she nodded. Then she disappeared through the door, like someone who was just doing their job. No capes, no halos, no loud speeches, just an angel in work clothes. And somewhere at the other end of the city, a homeless man, in the shadow of a car wash, finds a bag someone has kindly left by the wall. Inside there's a container of food, warm, a napkin, a note, "Hang in there, you matter. This isn't the end." He smiles for the first time in a week. He shares the food with a kitten that's been hiding in his jacket all morning, and in that moment, even though he doesn't know Samantha or Walter, he still feels their presence. Because kindness works quietly. But forever.